The clock on the wall showed 8:47 p.m. and Rosa was still on her feet. She had been working since 6 in the morning, pulling a double shift at Miller's Diner for the third time this week. Her feet ached, her back was sore, and she could feel the exhaustion creeping up her spine. But she couldn't afford to slow down. Not when her little brother David's college acceptance letter was sitting on their kitchen table at home, and the tuition payment was due in just 2 weeks. Rosa wiped down table number 7 for what felt like the 100th time that day. The red vinyl seats were cracked from years of use and the table wobbled slightly, no matter how many napkins she stuffed under the legs. But this place had been her lifeline for the past 8 months. When she couldn't find work anywhere else, when her applications got lost in piles on managers' desks, Miller's Diner had given her a chance. The dinner rush was finally dying down. Most of the regulars had gone home to their families, leaving behind empty coffee cups and crumpled napkins. Rosa moved between the tables like a dancer who had memorized every step. Collect the plates, wipe the surface, reset the silverware, smile at the next customer. It was a routine she could do with her eyes closed. The bell above the front door chimed and Rosa looked up to see a man in his 50s walking in from the rain. His gray hair was slightly damp, and his expensive black coat looked out of place in the simple diner. Everything about him screamed money, from his perfectly polished shoes to the gold watch that caught the fluorescent lights. But there was something in his eyes that made Rosa pause. He looked lost, like someone who had everything but felt empty inside. The man chose a corner booth near the window, the one that gave him a view of the parking lot. Rosa grabbed a menu and a glass of water, making her way over to him. As she got closer, she noticed he was staring out at the rain with such intensity, as if he was trying to find answers in the falling drops. "Good evening," Rosa said, setting the water down gently. "Can I start you off with some coffee?" The man looked up at her and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Sadness, maybe, or recognition of something she couldn't understand. "Yes, please, coffee would be good." Rosa brought over the coffee pot and filled his cup. The man's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for it, and she noticed he kept checking his phone every few seconds. The screen showed several missed calls, but he never answered any of them. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" Rosa asked. "Just whatever you recommend," he said quietly. "I'm not really hungry." Rosa studied his face. In her months of waitressing, she had learned to read people quickly. This man wasn't just tired or stressed from work. He was carrying something heavy, something that went deeper than a bad day at the office. She made a decision that would surprise even herself. "You know what? Let me bring you our beef stew. It's what my grandmother used to make when I was feeling down. It might not solve everything, but it'll warm you up on a night like this." For the first time since he walked in, the man almost smiled. "That sounds perfect." Rosa went to the kitchen and ladled out a generous portion of the stew. She added extra crackers and made sure the bowl was hot. When she brought it to his table, she also brought a small plate of the fresh cornbread that the cook usually saved for regular customers. "On the house," she said, setting down the cornbread. "Everyone needs a little extra comfort sometimes." The man took a bite of the stew and closed his eyes. "This is excellent. Thank you." Rosa went back to her other tables, but she kept an eye on the man in the corner. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. Every so often, he would look out the window, again, and that lost expression would return. His phone buzzed several more times, but he just turned it face down on the table. About 30 minutes later, Rosa noticed he had finished eating. She approached his table with the coffee pot for a refill, but he waved her off. "No more coffee for me. But I have to say, that was the best meal I've had in a long time." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Rosa said. "Sometimes food tastes better when someone cares about making it right." The man looked at her with genuine curiosity. "You really mean that, don't you? You actually care about your customers?" Rosa nodded. "Everyone who walks through that door is dealing with something. Maybe they had a fight with their spouse. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they're just lonely. A kind word and a good meal might be the only bright spot in their day. If I can give them that, then I've done something worthwhile. The man was quiet for a long moment. What's your name? Rosa. Rosa, you remind me of someone very special, someone who believed that kindness could change the world. There was pain in his voice when he said it, and Rosa felt her heart go out to this stranger who clearly carried deep wounds. She wanted to ask him about it, but something told her he wasn't ready to share that story. Well, kindness is free, Rosa said gently. Might as well spread it around. The man reached for his wallet and pulled out some bills. Rosa expected maybe a 20. It had been a good night for tips, and he seemed generous. But when he placed the money on the table, her eyes widened. There were multiple bills, more than she had seen in one tip in her entire waitressing career. Sir, I think you made a mistake, Rosa said, staring at what looked like at least $150. Your bill was only $12. The man stood up and put on his coat. No mistake. You gave me exactly what I needed tonight, and I want to give you something too. He paused at the edge of the table. You remind me of someone who always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Keep that spirit, Rosa. The world needs more people like you. Before Rosa could say another word, the man walked toward the door. He turned back once, gave her a small wave, and disappeared into the rainy night. Rosa stood there holding the money, her hands trembling. $150. That was enough to buy David's textbooks for his first semester. That was groceries for 2 weeks. That was hope when she had almost run out of it. She looked around the nearly empty diner. Old Pete was wiping down the grill in the kitchen, and Janet was counting the register. No one else had witnessed what just happened. For a moment, Rosa wondered if she had imagined the whole thing. But the money in her hands was real, and so was the warmth she felt knowing that her simple act of kindness had somehow mattered to a stranger. As she finished cleaning her last table, Rosa thought about the sadness she had seen in the man's eyes. She hoped that wherever he was going, he would find some peace. She had no way of knowing that their brief encounter would change both of their lives forever, or that the small silver pendant hanging around her neck would soon reveal a connection neither of them could have imagined. The rain continued to fall, outside Miller's diner, washing the streets clean and carrying away the dust of the day. Inside, Rosa carefully folded the money and tucked it into her apron pocket, already planning how she would surprise David with the news that his college dreams were still alive. The rain drummed against the windows of the luxury penthouse as Robert Hartwell sat in his leather chair, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the coffee table. The expensive liquor had been sitting there for over an hour, but he couldn't bring himself to take a sip. Nothing could wash away the weight he carried in his chest, especially not tonight. Robert's phone buzzed constantly on the side table. His assistant had been calling for hours, probably wondering why he hadn't returned from lunch. Board members were likely frustrated that he'd missed the quarterly meeting. Stock reports needed his attention, but for once in his life, the billionaire tech mogul didn't care about any of it. Today marked 15 years since the worst day of his life, and the business world would have to wait. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, faded photograph. The edges were worn from years of handling, and the colors had started to fade, but the image was still clear. A little girl with curly brown hair and the brightest smile he'd ever seen was sitting on a swing, her arms stretched wide like she was trying to hug the whole world. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old in the picture, but her eyes sparkled with a joy that seemed to light up everything around her. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," Robert whispered to the photograph, his voice cracking slightly. Lily had been everything to him. After his wife Maria died in childbirth complications when Lily was just 5, it had been just the two of them against the world. Robert threw himself into his work during those early years, building his tech company from the ground up. He told himself he was doing it for Lily, to give her the best life possible. But the truth was, work was easier than dealing with the grief of losing his wife. Lily never complained about his long hours or missed dinners. She would wait up for him every night no matter how late he came home, just to tell him about her day. She'd talk about her friends at school, the books she was reading, or the new game she'd invented. and she always ended with the same question. "Daddy, did you help people today with your work?" Robert smiled at the memory, even as tears formed in his eyes. Lily believed that everyone's job should help make the world better somehow. She was only 8, but she had this incredible ability to see the good in everything and everyone. Their doorman, Mrs. Peterson from next door, who always complained about the noise, even the grumpy man at the corner store. Lily treated them all like they were the most important people in the world. The pendant had been Maria's idea, back when they thought they'd have many more years together as a family. She'd commissioned a local jeweler to create 2 matching silver necklaces, each featuring a delicate hummingbird design. One was for Lily, and the other was for a little girl whose mother Maria had befriended, another young widow trying to raise her daughter alone. Hummingbirds represent joy and resilience, Maria had explained to 5-year-old Lily as she fastened the necklace around her tiny neck. No matter what storms come, they keep flying. They keep bringing sweetness wherever they go. Lily never took that necklace off, not for baths, not for swimming lessons, not even when she slept. She said it made her feel close to her mommy, and it reminded her to look for the sweetness in every day. Robert used to tease her about it, saying she'd probably be buried with that thing. He never imagined how prophetic those words would be. The car accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Robert had been in back-to-back meetings all day, his phone on silent. Lily's school had called multiple times. She'd gotten sick during lunch and needed to be picked up, but Robert didn't see the messages until after 6 o'clock. By then, Lily had been waiting in the nurse's office for hours. Mrs. Chen, their housekeeper, had finally gone to get her. On the way home, a drunk driver ran a red light and hit their car on Lily's side. Mrs. Chen survived with minor injuries, but Lily died instantly. The doctors said she didn't suffer, that it happened too quickly for her to feel any pain. But Robert suffered enough for both of them. The guilt nearly destroyed him. If he had just checked his phone, if he had put his daughter before another meeting, if he had been the one driving instead of asking Mrs. Chen to go. The what-ifs haunted him every single day for 15 years. Robert stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Thousands of lights twinkled below, each one representing families gathered around dinner tables, children doing homework, parents tucking their kids into bed. All the simple, precious moments he'd taken for granted until they were gone forever. Every year on this day, he visited Lily's grave. He'd sit by her headstone for hours, telling her about the company, about the new technologies they were developing, about the scholarships they'd created in her name. But mostly, he'd apologize. For being too busy, for missing so many bedtime stories, for not being there when she needed him most. This year had been different, though. As he'd driven away from the cemetery, something had pulled him toward that small diner on the outskirts of town. He'd never been there before. Never. Even noticed it during his usual route home. But something about the warm light spilling from its windows had drawn him in like a moth to a flame. And then he'd met Rosa. The young waitress had reminded him so strongly of Lily that it had taken his breath away. Not physically, Rosa was older with darker hair and different features, but she had that same genuine warmth, that same instinct to care for others even when she was clearly struggling herself. When Rosa had brought him the extra cornbread on the house and talked about everyone needing comfort sometimes, it was exactly the kind of thing Lily would have done. Robert had seen the tiredness in Rosa's eyes, the way she moved like someone carrying a heavy load. But instead of becoming bitter or selfish, she'd chosen kindness. She'd chosen to see his pain and respond with compassion, just like his daughter would have. Sitting in that simple diner booth, eating homemade stew while rain pelted the windows, Robert had felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. For just a moment, the crushing weight of grief had lifted slightly. It wasn't that the pain went away. It never would. But Rosa's simple act of human kindness had reminded him that Lily's spirit lived on in people like her. People who chose to spread sweetness in a world that often felt bitter. The tip he'd left wasn't really about the money. It was about honoring his daughter's memory by supporting someone who embodied everything Lily had believed in. Rosa had given him a gift that night. She'd shown him that kindness still existed in the world, that people like his daughter were still out there making a difference. Robert picked up the photograph from the coffee table and kissed it gently. "I met someone today who would have made you proud, sweetheart. Someone who still believes that helping others is the most important job in the world." As he finally headed to bed, Robert had no idea that the connection between him and Rosa ran deeper than he could possibly imagine. He didn't know that the pendant Rosa wore around her neck was the matching piece to his daughter's, or that their mothers had been friends all those years ago. He couldn't have guessed that fate was weaving their stories together in ways that would soon change both of their lives forever. Outside, the rain began to slow, and the first stars appeared through the breaking clouds. 3 days had passed since Robert's visit to Miller's diner, but he couldn't stop thinking about Rosa. He'd tried to go back to his normal routine, board meetings, investor calls, reviewing quarterly reports, but his mind kept wandering to that small corner booth and the young waitress who had shown him such unexpected kindness. Robert had built his empire by making quick decisions and moving on to the next challenge. He wasn't the type of person who dwelled on random encounters or got sentimental about strangers, but something about that night had stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt since Lily died. It wasn't just gratitude for Rosa's kindness. It was hope. Hope that maybe the world wasn't as cold and uncaring as he'd believed for the past 15 years. By Thursday afternoon, Robert found himself driving toward the diner again. He told his assistant he had a late lunch meeting and would be back in a couple of hours. But as he pulled into the parking lot of Miller's diner, he realized he had no idea what he was going to say to Rosa. What did a billionaire tech CEO have in common with a young waitress? How could he explain that their brief conversation had meant more to him than most of his business relationships? The lunch rush was just ending when Robert walked through the front door. The familiar smell of coffee and home cooking hit him immediately, and he felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. This place felt real in a way that his sterile corporate offices never did. Here, people talked to each other instead of staring at their phones. Conversations were about family and friends, not stock prices and market shares. Robert chose the same corner booth as before, and waited. A few minutes later, he saw Rosa emerge from the kitchen, carrying a tray of plates to a table near the window. She was wearing the same simple uniform, black pants and a white shirt with the diner's logo, but something about her seemed different today. Happier, maybe. There was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there on Tuesday night. And when Rosa spotted him, her face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. "You came back," she said, walking over to his table with a warm smile. "I wasn't sure if we'd see you again." "I couldn't stay away from that beef stew," Robert said, returning her smile. "And I wanted to thank you again for Tuesday night. You have no idea how much that meant to me." Rosa poured coffee into his cup without being asked. "Everyone needs a little kindness sometimes. I'm just glad I could help." She paused, then added with a grin, "Besides, you kind of made my whole month with that tip. My brother David is starting college in the fall, and your generosity is going to buy his textbooks." Robert felt a warm glow in his chest. This was exactly why he'd been drawn back here. Rosa wasn't working multiple jobs to buy luxury items or go on expensive vacations. She was sacrificing her own comfort to help her family build a better future. It reminded him so much of the values Lily had cherished, putting others first, finding joy in helping people succeed. "Tell me about your brother," Robert said. "What's he studying?" Rosa's eyes sparkled as she talked about David, how he'd always been the smart one in the family, how he'd worked part-time jobs all through high school to save money for college, how he wanted to become an engineer and design bridges that would help connect rural communities. Robert found himself genuinely interested in the story, asking questions about David's goals and Rosa's plans for the future. "What about you?" Rosa asked as she refilled his coffee cup again. "Do you have family?" The question hit Robert like a physical blow, but he tried not to let it show on his face. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. "She would have been About your age now. Rosa's expression immediately softened. Would have been? She died when she was 8. Car accident. Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Rosa said, and Robert could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. That must have been devastating. Robert nodded, not trusting himself to speak for a moment. Then Rosa did something that surprised him. Instead of offering empty platitudes or trying to change the subject, she simply stood there quietly, giving him space to feel his grief without trying to fix it or make it better. It was exactly what he needed, and somehow she had known that instinctively. She was everything to me, Robert finally said. Smart, funny, kind to everyone she met. She had this way of making people feel special, like they mattered. Kind of like someone else I know. Rosa smiled sadly. She sounds wonderful. I bet she was proud to have you as her dad. The words hit Robert harder than he expected. He'd spent 15 years convinced that he'd failed Lily, that he'd been too focused on work to be the father she deserved. But hearing Rosa say those words with such conviction made him wonder if maybe he was being too hard on himself. As Rosa reached across the table to refill his water glass, Robert's eyes fell on something that made his blood run cold. There, hanging from a delicate silver chain around Rosa's neck, was a pendant that looked exactly like the one Lily used to wear. The same intricate hummingbird design, the same delicate wings spread in flight, the same tiny details that he remembered from watching his daughter fidget with it during car rides and bedtime stories. Robert's hands began to shake. He blinked, hard, certain that grief was playing tricks on his mind. But when he looked again, the pendant was still there. It was impossible. Lily's necklace had been buried with her 15 years ago. He'd specifically asked the funeral director to make sure she was wearing it, because he couldn't bear the thought of her being without something that had brought her so much comfort. Rosa, Robert said, his voice hoarse. Your necklace. Where? Did you get it? Rosa's hand automatically went to the pendant, her fingers closing around it protectively. This? It was my mother's. Well, my birth mother's. She died when I was little, and this is the only thing I have left of her. Robert felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Can I see it? Just for a moment? Rosa looked puzzled by his request, but she could see the intensity in his eyes. Slowly, she lifted the chain over her head and handed it to him. Robert took the pendant with trembling fingers, turning it over to examine every detail. On the back, in tiny engraved letters, were the initials M.H., Maria Hartwell, his wife's initials. But that was impossible. Maria had commissioned 2 necklaces from that local jeweler, but the other one was supposed to have gone to her friend's daughter, a woman whose last name Robert couldn't even remember. Rosa, Robert whispered, staring at the pendant like he was holding a piece of his soul. What was your birth mother's name? Carmen Rodriguez, Rosa said, watching Robert's face with growing concern. Sir, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Carmen Rodriguez. The name hit Robert like lightning. Carmen had been Maria's best friend during her pregnancy, another young woman who was facing the prospect of raising a daughter alone. Robert remembered her now, a quiet, artistic woman who worked part-time for the same jeweler who had made Lily's pendant. The 2 women had bonded over their shared circumstances, supporting each other through the challenges of single motherhood. But Carmen had moved away shortly after Maria died, taking her daughter with her. Robert had lost touch with them during his own grief, and he'd never thought to look for them again. Until now, he'd assumed the matching pendant had simply disappeared into someone else's life. Robert looked up at Rosa, seeing her with completely new eyes. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just a random act of kindness from a stranger. Rosa was connected to his family in ways that defied explanation. She was wearing his wife's work, carrying a piece of Maria's love and artistry close to her heart every single day. I need to tell you something, Robert said, his voice shaking. This pendant, it has a story that you need to hear. Rosa sat across from Robert in the quiet diner booth, watching his face cycle through a dozen different emotions as he held her pendant. The lunch crowd had thinned out, leaving them mostly alone except for old Pete washing dishes in the kitchen and the soft hum of the coffee machine. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across their table. "Mr. Hartwell," Rosa said gently, using the name she'd seen on his credit card receipt. "You're scaring me a little. What's wrong?" Robert looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears he was trying hard not to shed. "This pendant, it's not just similar to my daughter's. It's the matching piece. My wife Maria made 2 of them, 15 years ago. One for our daughter Lily and one for her best friend's little girl." Rosa felt her world tilt slightly. "Your wife made this?" Maria was incredibly talented with jewelry design. She worked part-time for old Mr. Chen at the jewelry shop downtown, learning traditional techniques. When she found out she was pregnant, she became friends with another young woman who was also expecting. They both knew they'd be raising their daughters mostly alone. Maria because I was always working, and her friend because... Robert paused, trying to remember. Because the father wasn't in the picture. Rosa's hands were shaking now. She'd always wondered about the pendant's history. Carmen had left so few clues about her past. Just stories about a dear friend who had helped her through the hardest time in her life. What was her friend's name? Carmen Rodriguez. She was quiet, artistic, incredibly kind. Maria absolutely adored her. Robert handed the pendant back to Rosa with reverence, as if he was returning a piece of sacred history. Carmen worked for the same jewelry shop where Maria was learning her craft. That's how they met. Rosa clutched the pendant to her chest, her mind racing. Carmen Rodriguez, her birth mother's name, but how was this possible? "Mr. Hartwell, I think Carmen Rodriguez was my mother." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they could cross. Robert stared at Rosa as if he was seeing her for the first time, studying her features with new understanding. "Your adoption records," Robert said slowly. "What do they say about your birth mother?" "Not much, just that she died when I was 5, and that I went into foster care because there were no relatives who could take me." Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. "I was adopted by the Martinez family when I was 8, but I kept my birth mother's pendant. It was the only thing I had left of her." Robert closed his eyes, and Rosa could see him working through calculations in his head. "Carmen moved away right after Maria died. I was so consumed with my own grief that I lost touch with her completely. I always wondered what happened to that second pendant, but I assumed it had just disappeared into someone else's life." "How did your wife die?" Rosa asked gently. "Complications during childbirth. She was so excited about becoming a mother, and then..." Robert's voice broke slightly. "She held Lily for about an hour before the bleeding got too bad. The doctors couldn't stop it." Rosa felt tears forming in her own eyes. "My mom, Carmen, she used to tell me stories about a friend who taught her about strength and love. She said this friend showed her that even when life breaks your heart, you can still choose to make beautiful things." "That sounds like Maria," Robert said with a sad smile. "She always believed that beauty could heal pain, that creating something lovely was a way of fighting back against all the ugliness in the world." The pieces were falling into place like a puzzle Rosa had been trying to solve her entire life. Carmen used to say that this pendant was made with love by someone who understood what it meant to be afraid and hopeful at the same time. She told me to wear it whenever I felt lost because it would remind me that I wasn't alone. Robert reached across the table and touched Rosa's hand gently. "You weren't alone. You never were. Maria loved you before you were even born. Just because Carmen loved you and Lily." His voice caught. "Lily would have been so excited to meet you. She always wanted a sister." Rosa felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that had been locked for years. All her life, she'd felt like she was missing pieces of her story. The foster homes, the adoption, the constant feeling that she didn't quite belong anywhere. It had all left her with questions that seemed impossible to answer. But now, sitting in this simple diner with a man who had known her birth mother, she was finally getting some of those answers. "Tell me about Lily," Rosa said. "What was she like?" Robert's face lit up despite his tears. She was sunshine in human form, always helping people, always seeing the best in everyone. She had this laugh that could fill up a whole room, and she never met a stranger. Every morning she'd wake up excited about the day ahead, like the world was full of wonderful surprises just waiting to be discovered. She sounds amazing. She was. And you know what? She would have loved you. The way you took care of me that night, the way you care about your brother, the way you treat everyone who walks into this diner with kindness. That's exactly the kind of person Lily always wanted to be around. Rosa wiped her eyes with her napkin. It feels like fate, doesn't it? All these years later, we end up in the same place, at the same time. I don't usually believe in fate, Robert admitted. I've always been more of a logic and numbers person, but this feels like something bigger than coincidence. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Rosa fingered the pendant, seeing it with completely new eyes. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry anymore. It was a connection to a mother she barely remembered, to a friend her mother had cherished, and to a man who had lost as much as she had. "Mr. Hartwell," Rosa said finally, "what happens now?" Robert considered the question carefully. "I don't know. I never expected to find you, and I'm sure you never expected to find me, but I'd like to get to know you better, if you're open to that. I'd like to tell you more stories about Maria and Carmen, about their friendship and the dreams they had for their daughters." "I'd like that too," Rosa said. "I've always wondered about my mother's life before I was born. And I'd love to hear more about Lily." "There's something else," Robert said hesitantly. "I know you're working hard to help your brother with college, and I know what it's like to struggle financially. I'd like to help if you'll let me. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I think Maria would have wanted me to look out for Carmen's daughter." Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Part of her wanted to refuse. She'd always been proud of her independence, determined to make her own way in the world. But another part of her recognized that this wasn't charity. This was family in the most unexpected and beautiful way possible. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Robert stood up and left money on the table for his coffee. "But Rosa, I want you to know that meeting you has given me something I thought I'd lost forever. It's given me hope that the people we love never really leave us. They live on in the connections they created, in the love they shared, in the beautiful things they left behind." As Robert walked toward the door, Rosa called after him, "Mr. Hartwell, thank you for telling me about my mother, and about Maria, and about Lily. I finally feel like I know where I came from." Robert turned back with the first genuine smile Rosa had seen from him. "You came from love, Rosa. You came from two women who believed in kindness and beauty and hope, and that's exactly who you turned out to be." 2 weeks had passed since the revelation at Miller's diner, and Rosa found herself thinking about Robert's offer every single day. She'd gone home that afternoon and told David everything, about the mysterious, generous customer, about the pendant's true history, about discovering a connection to a family she never knew existed. David had listened with wide eyes, occasionally interrupting to ask questions that Rosa couldn't answer. "So this guy, Robert, he knew our real mom?" David had asked, sprawled across their tiny living room couch. "Not exactly. He knew her through his wife. But David, he has stories about her, about what she was like, things I never knew." Rosa had fingered the pendant as she spoke, still amazed by the turns her life had taken. "And he wants to help with my college?" he offered. "But I don't know if we should accept it. We've always made our own way." David had been quiet for a long moment. "Rosa, you've been working yourself to death for months to help me. If this man wants to help, and if he's connected to our family somehow, maybe it's okay to let him." Now sitting in the same corner booth where everything had started, Rosa waited nervously for Robert to arrive. She'd called him the night before and asked if they could meet again. There were so many questions she still had, so many pieces of her story that remained unclear, and she'd made a decision about his offer. Robert walked through the diner door at exactly 3 o'clock, just as he'd promised. He looked different today, less burdened somehow. The deep sadness was still there in his eyes, but it was softer now, mixed with something that looked like hope. "Rosa," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you again." "I needed time to think," Rosa said honestly. "This is all so overwhelming. My whole life I've felt like I was missing something, like there were pieces of my story that I'd never find. And then you walk into my diner and change everything." Robert nodded. "I understand. When I lost Lily, I thought my story was over. I thought the best parts of my life were behind me forever. Meeting you has made me realize that maybe stories don't end the way we think they do. Maybe they just change direction." Rosa smiled. "I like that. Stories changing direction instead of ending." "Have you thought about my offer?" Robert asked gently. "I have. And I want to accept it, but not the way you probably meant it." Rosa took a deep breath. "I don't want you to just pay for David's college and walk away. I want us to be part of each other's lives. I want to hear more stories about Maria and Carmen. I want to know about Lily, about what she loved and what made her laugh. I want this to be the beginning of something, not just a one-time gift." Robert's eyes filled with tears, but he was smiling. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." "Really? Rosa, meeting you has reminded me that there's still good in the world. Still people who choose kindness even when life is hard. I've spent 15 years building walls around my heart, convinced that caring about people would only lead to more pain. But you've shown me that the pain is worth it if it means making real connections." Rosa felt her own tears starting. "I've always felt alone, even when I was surrounded by good people like my adoptive family. But talking with you, learning about our connection through our mothers, it makes me feel like I belong somewhere, like I'm part of a bigger story." "You are. You absolutely are." Robert reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'd like to tell you more about that story if you want to hear it." Over the next hour, Robert shared memories that Rosa had never heard before. He told her about Carmen's incredible talent for making people feel special, about how she could turn scraps of metal and wire into beautiful jewelry that seemed to capture sunlight. He described the friendship between Maria and Carmen, how they'd supported each other through pregnancy and new motherhood, how they dreamed about their daughters growing up together. "Carmen was so excited about you," Robert said. "Maria used to tell me about their phone calls, how Carmen would describe every little thing you did. Your first smile, your first steps, the way you'd clap your hands when you heard music. She loved you so much, Rosa." "What happened to her?" "I mean, I know she died when I was 5, but the records don't say much about how or why." Robert's expression grew sad. "Cancer. It happened very quickly. Maria had already been gone for 3 years by then, but Carmen called me when she got the diagnosis. She was terrified about what would happen to you." Rosa felt her chest tighten. "She called you?" "She did. She asked if I would consider taking you in, raising you alongside Lily. She knew we weren't close friends, but she remembered how much Maria had trusted me." Robert's voice grew heavy with regret. "I said no. I was so consumed with my own grief, so focused on protecting Lily from any more loss that I couldn't see past my own pain. I told Carmen I wasn't in a place to take on another child." The silence stretched between them as Rosa processed this information. "So I went into foster care because you said no." "Yes, and I've regretted that decision every single day since Lily died. If I had said yes, if I had brought you home, you would have had a sister. Lily would have had the companion she always wanted. Both of you might have grown up feeling less alone." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, working through her emotions. Part of her felt angry. She'd spent years in foster care, feeling unwanted and displaced when she could have had a family. But another part of her understood. Grief made people do things that didn't make sense, made them build walls when they should have been building bridges. "Robert," she said finally, "you were in pain. You were trying to protect your daughter. I can't be angry at you for that. You should be angry. You have every right to be. Maybe. but being angry won't change the past, and besides, if things had been different, I might never have been adopted by the Martinez family. I might never have learned to be independent. I might never have become the person I am today. Rosa smiled. I like who I am, even if the path to get here was harder than it needed to be. Robert looked at her with something like awe. You sound just like Lily. She always said that everything happens for a reason, even the hard stuff. Maybe she was right. Maybe we needed to find each other now, when we're both ready to appreciate what we've found. Robert nodded slowly. I'd like to be part of your life, Rosa. Not as someone trying to make up for past mistakes, but as someone who cares about you and wants to see you succeed. I'd like to help with David's education, but I'd also like to be there for other things. Graduations, celebrations, quiet Tuesday dinners, would that be okay? More than okay, Rosa said. I'd like that very much. There's something else I want to discuss, Robert said. I've been thinking about starting a foundation in Lily's memory. Something focused on helping young people who've aged out of foster care, who need support getting started in life. Would you consider helping me run it? Rosa's eyes widened. Me? But I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know about kindness. You know about helping people when they're struggling. You know about not giving up when things get hard. Those are the most important qualifications. Robert leaned forward. Besides, Lily always said the best way to heal from pain is to help other people avoid the same pain. Rosa thought about all the kids she'd known in foster care, all the young adults who'd aged out of the system without family support or guidance. I'd love to help with that. I'd love to make sure other kids don't fall through the cracks. As they prepared to leave the diner, Rosa touched the pendant around her neck one more time. It didn't feel like just a piece of jewelry anymore. It felt like a bridge between past and present, between loss and hope, between two people who had found family in the most unexpected place. Thank you, she said to Robert as they stood outside the diner. For what? For giving me back my story, for helping me understand where I came from, for showing me that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. Robert smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes completely. Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't end when people die. It just finds new ways to grow. As Rosa walked back to her car, she knew her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. She had family again, purpose again, hope again. And somewhere, she liked to think, two mothers who had loved deeply and created beautiful things were smiling down at the connection their daughters had finally found.